Yep, I'm still going through the box of magazines up here in Grandma's attic. They covered decades, and they're all in perfect condition. I know Pop, my granddad, he was a collector, but not a hoarder. He must have had some kind of commerce in mind when he bundled these up so neatly. You know, he and Dandy, they weren't rich by any means, but Pop was a shrewd businessman, Mother told me. I remember him as a short, rather cocky fellow, stern. I don't remember him laughing or even being very pleasant. You know, when I was really little, he owned the house we lived in. And one day he was up on a ladder, I don't know, doing something with the rain gutter, when a bluebird started circling him. And then it swooped down and it just pecked the daylights out of his shiny, bald head. I know that's not funny, but the whole family giggled because Pop hated birds. And we wondered if that bluebird didn't sense it. Okay, let's see what... Oh boy, more National Geographics. Well, how can anybody ever throw away a National Geographic? I mean, it's like there's some kind of moral or literary law that says you can't toss out all that great photography and good writing. I suspect there are many bundles of National Geographics in attics, maybe all over the world. Look at this, will you? A 1956 TV guide. You know, everybody who had a TV used that guide. We looked at what was programmed for the week, and then we circled what we wanted to watch, and we made an effort to remember to turn on the TV when that show came on. Look at this. There's a picture of Dinah Shore on the cover of this TV guide. You remember Dinah Shore?
I'll close my eyes to everyone but you, and when I do, I'll see you standing there. I'll lock my heart to any other caress. I'll never say yes to a new love affair. I'll close my eyes to everything that's gay. If you're not there to share each lovely day, and through the years, those moments when we're apart, I'll close my eyes and see you with my heart.
Well, as you know by now, everything reminds me of a story. And certainly this cover does. So I've got to share it. We were living in Kansas City, and we had 4 children just barely out of diapers. And I remember I was standing at the kitchen sink one morning, washing up the breakfast dishes. I'd been painting our dining room table, and my pink nightgown, it was a mess. I had paint from head to toe. So I'm standing there, up to my elbows in soap suds, listening to the children chase the dog, or maybe it was the other way around, through the kitchen, into the dining room, onto the living room, down a short hall, and back into the kitchen again, round and round and round, giggling, giggling, barking, barking, and me in a paint-splattered nightgown in a sea of soap suds. And then all of a sudden, I stopped. I just stopped what I was doing, and I stared out the window at nothing in particular. I was asking myself, if I could be doing anything in the world I wanted to do, what would it be? And I flashed on an image of Dinah Shore, who had an afternoon television talk show by this time. Ah, yes, yes. I'd love to have a talk show like the adorable Dinah Shore. Well, I got to thinking, why not? I mean, I wonder how one would do something like that. Where would you begin? It seemed to me that you'd have to start small and sort of, work your way up to national TV. So I dried my hands, I closed and latched the kitchen door, and I reached for the phone book. Like everybody else in those days, we had a wall phone in the kitchen with a chair under it. So I decided to call the smallest radio station I could find and ask for the manager. Now, what I do from that point, I just leave it to God. I'd already stated what my wish was. I just leave it to God. Well, I found a station called KCCV, which later I learned stood for Kansas City Christian Voice, but I'd never heard of it. Anyway, I dialed and I asked for the station manager, and he came on the line. And I said, "Hi, I'm about to launch a woman's talk show, and I was wondering if KCCV might be interested." And you know what he said? He said, "Well, your timing couldn't be better. We were just having a meeting on that very subject. Yes, we'd love to talk to you about having a woman's talk show. Could you come right over?" Could I dance a jig in my kitchen? Well, I ran to the basement and I got some kerosene and I scrubbed off the paint. And then I took a shower and I threw on a skirt and a blouse. And I ran across the street to see if my neighbor, Virginia, would babysit the kids. And I was on my way to Independence, Missouri, hometown of the former President Harry Truman, and broadcast studios of the teeny little KCCV. When I walked out of that station a couple of hours later, I had a contract for a daily 15-minute talk show. Oh, Lordy. The manager said we'd first broadcast a kind of premiere by my interviewing Charlton Heston on Sunday when he'd be in Kansas City to promote his latest movie. The station would arrange for me to be part of a press breakfast to be held in a private dining room at the President Hotel that's in downtown Kansas City. Now, I won't bother you about that story, and believe me, that is a story unto itself, maybe for another time. But for right now, I'll just share that I got the interview, and it aired the following day, Sunday, and on Monday, we began the daily program. It was called Personality Showcase, I think was the title. And I actually had a sponsor who moved me to a larger station about 3 months later. Well, golly, I was on my way, but I wasn't sure where I was on my way to. First of all, I made almost nothing, 15 minutes on a daily little tiny station. And I knew that I needed to reach a larger audience if I were to walk in Dinah Shore's shoes. So, with 4 little children and a husband who made very little as well, I couldn't afford any nice clothes, but I had an idea. I heard that Red Foley, at that time a huge star in the country western world, was going to be appearing at the county fair in Topeka, Kansas. That was about 80 miles outside of Kansas City. So I went to the best department store and got myself a pretty little blue suede skirt, a white satin blouse, blue suede cowboy boots, and a vest with fringe. There wasn't a single item in it that I could afford. So I got it late in the evening so that my check wouldn't go out to the bank that day. Then I went home and I called Topeka Information and proceeded to call each motel and hotel until I found where Red Foley was registered. Well, he was out, so I left a message at the front desk saying that I'd like to interview him for my country western radio show. Not that I had one, I didn't. But I figured that if I could get a Foley interview, I'd take it to the biggest country western station in the Midwest that happened to be in Kansas City, and I'd land a show. This sounds like that I'm a girl who's really gutsy. I'm really not. I'm very, very shy. I think of these things, but doing them, that's another thing entirely. Anyway, it was around 10 that night when the phone rang, and I heard this deep voice on the other end of the line ask for me. And then Red Foley said, after he introduced himself, "I never, ever return calls, not from media, not from anybody I don't know. But I told one of the fellows who travels with me that something said to call this number." Well, the end result was that he would give me an hour's interview the next day before the show opened at the fair that night. So the next day, I put on my little cowgirl outfit, and I'm lugging a heavy old Wallensack recorder. Do you remember a Wallensack? Oh, they weighed a ton. Anyway, I'm struggling with it down the hall of this Ramada Inn. I find his door, I knock on it, and he yells to come on in. Now, I probably weighed about 110 pounds soaking wet. But did any of the three men with Foley or Foley himself offer to help me with a monster recorder? They did not. So I said, as I grunted and moaned, trying to heist the thing to a side table, "Hey, that's okay, boys, don't worry. I've got it. Don't trouble yourself. It's okay." Well, they stopped talking and they burst into laughter, and then two of them jumped up to give me a hand. Oh, dear. Foley and we did a 20-minute interview, and then the most incredible thing happened. We began to connect. It was almost as if we were family. I felt as if I'd known him my entire life, and he said I was more of a niece to him than his own kin. Well, when we finished the interview, it was time to head out to the fairground. Foley and we had intended to part at that point, but he invited me to join him, and of course I accepted. But because he was the headline act, he came on last, so we spent nearly 2 hours just sitting in an empty tour bus on the fairgrounds behind the stage, just talking. And he told me how he came to record his most famous old Shep, that he was a kid, and no one wanted to hear him sing. Somebody paid for that record to be made. He took it to someone in the recording business, and history was made. Then he told me about his daughter being married to the singer Pat Boone, and about his wife, and about how he'd discovered little Brenda Lee when she was just a kid. And then he said to me, "Esther, what would you like to be? Tell me what you want to do with your life, and I'll make it happen." I did it for Brenda Lee and lots of others. Just name it. I want to do this. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't really have any ambition. Well, yes, to have a national talk show like Dinah Shore. But I didn't tell him that because it sounded even stupid in my head. I told him that I was married and had 4 little kids. And I realized that was the truth. I truly wasn't ambitious. I was curious to know if I could do something I set out to do, and that I had no talent, no ability, no context to make such a thing happen. I really am very shy, and self-promotion, it's the last thing I wanted to do then and still is. Anyway, it came his time to go on stage, and let me tell you this part. Foley, he had a bit of a drinking problem. So the deal was that he wasn't allowed to have even a beer, nothing, until the performance was over. Well, by the time he said he had to go on stage, one of the fellows who traveled with him always had a Dixie cup of water waiting for him the moment before he stepped before the audience. And too, I noticed all afternoon and evening how old and how very tired Red Foley looked. I felt bad for him. Maybe that was one reason I liked him so much. I felt that his glory days were over. And gee, he was genuinely nice, a sweet man. Anyway, Foley asked if I'd sit in the front row while he performed. And his sidekick asked if I'd hand him the Dixie cup of water before he went on. Well, I did both of those things. Then the band played his intro music, and all of a sudden, a younger, vibrant Red Foley, not the man I'd spent the day with, certainly, came bounding onto the stage. And there was a huge smile lighting his face, and he looked at me as the applause died down, and he said, "I'd like to dedicate tonight's show to a dear friend right there in the front row. Esther, stand up and wave to the people, honey." Which I did. Oh my goodness, I was so glad I had that pretty little cowgirl outfit on. Well, Foley, I realized, he lived to sing. He lived to entertain. He dropped 30 years during that performance, and the crowd adored him. Now, here's the funny story. This is funny. After the show, Red Foley, his name was Clyde, and he asked if I'd call him that. Anyway, he and his cronies, plus the other Grand Ole Opry performers who had been on that night with him, we all went to the Ramada Inn coffee shop for a late dinner. It was really magical, but I have to tell you, a big farm lady came in with her husband and a couple of kids, and she saw Red Foley, and she made a beeline for him, just screeching, "Oh, my favorite singer in the world! Oh, I can't believe it!" Well, when she reached our table, she held out her program, and she was blushing. Her face was all red when she said, "Oh, I just love you. Oh, would you sign my program, Mr. Tubbs?" My mouth sort of fell open as I turned to Clyde to see how he was going to respond. I mean, the woman obviously thought he was Ernest Tubbs. Well, Clyde took that program, and he smiled his most endearing smile, and he said, "Well, sure, of course I will." And he did. He signed, "Best wishes to you always, Ernest Tubb." Well, the woman grabbed the program, so thrilled. And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I cannot remember your name for the life of me, but you are my favorite female country singer. Would you sign the program too?" And Clyde said, "Go ahead, Wanda. Sign the nice lady's program." So I signed, "Love to you and yours, Wanda Jackson." And that lady, she walked out of that restaurant clutching that treasured program to her bosom, thrilled to pieces to have the autographs of her 2 favorite singers that she never met. Oh, gosh. After dinner, He confided that he traveled with two men at all times because he had a premonition that if he were to travel alone, he'd die. He said the one thing he feared more than anything in the world was to die alone in a motel room in a strange city. Well, when he got up to use the restroom, his friend, whose name I honestly can't remember, I apologize. Anyway, he told me how it was an obsession with him not to be alone in a strange city. And so the two men that he traveled with were never out of his sight, he said. Well, one of the men had a message at the desk and someone delivered it to the cafe. And the men were backup musicians also for a band in Nashville. And they were needed for a session the next afternoon. But Clyde was booked to appear at the Indiana County Fair, and they were set to fly there with him the next morning. So Clyde, he begged the men not to go back to Nashville, but to fly there with him the next day. And I could see there was kind of a panic in his eyes. And one of the men said, "Look, Clyde, you go on ahead. Go on to Indiana, settle into the motel suite, and we'll fly back the minute the session in Nashville ends. We'll be there with you before you're even awake the next morning." Well, I could see he didn't like it, but what could he do, really? So he said in a really soft voice, "Just one night alone, is that it?" And the man said again, "We'll be there before the sun comes up, Clyde." And so Clyde flew out the next morning alone. When we parted, when dinner was over and everybody was saying their goodbyes, he and I vowed to stay in touch. So the next day, I returned the cowgirl duds, saying that my husband didn't approve of the clothes, and I got a full refund. Then I got a call from one of Clyde's friends, one of those two men. They had finished their work in Nashville, and they were headed to the airport to fly on to Indiana, when they got a call from the motel manager. Red Foley had died of an aneurysm in the night, and it was the first time he'd been alone in a motel room in over a decade. I'll just never forget my best friend for one whole day, Red Foley.
Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart. Love looms at night, in daylight it dies. Don't let the stars get in your eyes. Keep your heart for me, for someday I'll return, and you know you're the only one I'll ever love. Too many nights, too many stars, too many moons to change your mind. If I'm gone too long, don't forget where you belong. When the stars come out, remember you are mine. Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart. Love looms at night, in daylight it dies. Don't let the stars get in your eyes. Keep your heart for me, for someday I'll return, and you know you're the only one I'll ever love. Too many miles, too many days, too many nights to be alone. While we're apart, don't stand in the moonlight while I'm gone. Don't let the stars get in your eyes, don't let the moon break your heart. Love looms at night, in daylight it dies. Don't let the stars get in your eyes. Keep your heart for me, for someday I'll return, and you know you're the only one I'll ever love. Too many days, tonight. Don't let the stars get in your eyes. Oh, my. Oh, thank you, wonderful, kind people. Bless your hearts.
Once more, I do want to thank David Fesliyan of Fesliyan Studios for that beautiful theme song. To Peter Herrmann on Unsplash for the lovely graphic. And as always, to Radio Echoes for the recording of Dinah Shore singing I Close My Eyes. That's from her 1946 radio program. And for Red Foley's Don't Let the Stars Get in Your Eyes. Time to go this time. So till next time, God bless.